Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. This program is sponsored by the Institute of Politics and the Joan Shorenstein Center on the Press, Politics, and Public Policy. I'm Jean Shaheen. I'm the director here at the Institute of Politics. And we think the program tonight is going to be very unique. It's part of a series that we're doing on the campaign 2008, looking ahead. Some of you are familiar with what we do every 4 years after a presidential campaign, where the campaign managers get together and look back at the campaigns and at what happened during the campaigns. Well, this year, we're doing a little bit different. We want to start by looking ahead at how the campaign managers and top strategists see the 2008 campaign unveiled as we go forward. So tonight we have top strategists from the McCain, Giuliani, and Romney campaigns here to talk to us about what they think this campaign is going to look like. And we're especially pleased to see so many students here in the audience tonight, because what we do at the Institute of Politics is work very hard at trying to get young people engaged in politics and public service. We believe that politics matters, and we appreciate the work of people like our guests here tonight and what they have done to make a difference in the political arena. This is the first in a series. On the 19th, we hope you will come back, where we give equal time to the top strategists from the Democratic campaigns of Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and John Edwards, and then come back again in April, where the remaining candidates who will be running will be featured. Their top strategists, that is. Tonight, to moderate this session is someone who is well known, I think, to all of us who are political junkies. Mark Halperin is the political editor at ABC News. He's also the founder and editor of The Note, which most of us start out reading in the morning. But more important for us here at the Institute of Politics, he was a Harvard student who was active at the IOP when he was here, and he is now a visiting fellow with the Institute of Politics and the Shorenstein Center. So Mark, we're delighted that you're here to moderate tonight's discussion.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you. I want to go as quick as we can to questioning these three excellent men who I'll introduce in a moment. As Governor Shaheen said, in 2 weeks we'll have leading strategists for the leading Democratic presidential candidates. It's good for once Harvard to give equal time, as she said, to the Democrats in 2 weeks. But tonight we're talking about the Republican race, and it is already a very competitive race. When we were starting to talk about doing this series, we thought, well, if we do these in March or April, it'll be after the campaigns are sort of formally up and running, but before things get hot and heavy and very intense. And obviously, all of you know, because you're here tonight, that this has already started out very fast, not any earlier than usual, because campaigns tend to start these days pretty early, but it's more intense than it's been. And these gentlemen have been good enough to come up here and talk to all of us at a time when they're already involved in lots of meetings, conference calls, I'd imagine. And in the case of, I would say, tonight as a snapshot, in the case of two campaigns, what you might call, even in February the year before, crises in the campaigns and having to deal with problems of controlling their public image and dealing with the campaign's current status. So it's great for them to be here. I will quickly introduce them. Hopefully you all were given, as you came in, these programs that tell you biographically who they are. But I will just say simply, they are three of the leading strategists in either party in the country today with broad experience in Democratic and Republican presidential politics. And we're going to get some conversation going with them, and then we'll start to take your questions. I'll remind you now, as I will later, that we do mean questions and not speeches, and we'll talk about where the mics are and all that in a bit. Sitting right here, Alex Castellanos works for Mitt Romney. Again, he's worked in a variety of presidential campaigns over the years, including Phil Graham's less than successful one and President Bush's more successful ones. Rick Davis, who works for Senator McCain and also worked for him in 2000. I believe you were primarily in charge of winning the New Hampshire primary in that race.
Yes, that's right.
Congratulations on that. And Chris Hennick, who works for Mayor Giuliani, who's worked also, again, in many campaigns, including for President Bush, and of course, these days in Republican politics. If you've had success anytime lately in presidential politics, you've done it working for President Bush. And all of them, again, have long experience in this. So let me just get started by talking about what, for now at least, appears to be the biggest issue in this race, and maybe will be the biggest issue all the way through, Iraq. All of your candidates have taken positions largely the same, largely supportive of President Bush's new policy, and largely supportive of a continued U.S. military involvement there. Now, some people believe that that may be dangerous for the general election, that all of your, whoever emerges, assuming it's one of your three candidates, all your candidates will be tied to a policy which is unpopular and which may be decisive in the general election. So, Chris Hennick, let me start with you. Is there a danger politically in clinging to the president's policy and being supportive of the president's policy, and might that change even before there's a Republican nominee?
Nothing's in danger so long as the American mission in Iraq succeeds. And that's the clear sense, I believe, that all three candidates, I can't speak for the other two, but I've pretty much seen that we're all identical in that first accountable goal. I think that's what Mayor Giuliani's been talking about, is we need accountable governments and governments there in Iraq. And as well, as you probably saw in January 12th, I believe, in an opinion page from the Wall Street Journal with former Speaker Newt Gingrich, where he outlined not only do we need military success, we need a civilian success, so to speak, in jobs. There's roughly unemployment's anywhere between 30 to 50% in Iraq. And even in the report that was released, even with the troop advancement and how people look at where that reinforces the troops, there needs to be a civilian answer to this as well, too. So I think it's first and foremost certainly important. I think what we also saw, though, was from the 2006 elections, the Democratic Party and candidates were successful in attempting to decouple Iraq from the overall war on terror. And I believe that's where you see Mayor Giuliani not only focusing on the importance of Iraq, but moving beyond the threats and where we need to move the next commander-in-chief, and the threats that he deals with are not only Iraq, but beyond.
Rick, I read all the time and hear on cable television chattering class shows on which you sometimes appear that while all three candidates have roughly the same position on Iraq, that John McCain has become the face of Iraq, of the surge, and that is hurting him. Do you accept that he has become, more than the other two represented here, the face of the surge? And if so, how'd you let that happen?
All part of the master strategy. Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's kind of interesting how we got here, and that is that John felt strongly, even as far back as 2004, that Iraq would be the transcendent issue of our time. He said so many times. He campaigned heavily with George Bush because he truly felt that George Bush would have a better chance of solving the riddle of this Islamic extremism and Iraq war. Since then, he has not, I don't think, spent a day in the public domain not talking about Iraq, because he still to this day believes that it's the transcendent issue of our time, and that if we don't get this right, the consequences of failure in Iraq are so far beyond what we want to envision as a country that we have to win. It's not whether we want to or not even really if we can or not. It's that we need the national will to succeed. And I think he sees that as part of his charge, is to create national will, to create the backing within the public to do so. And there is some polling data that reinforces his position on this. Not that people aren't dissatisfied with the failures of the war. There's no question about that, and John's talked about that for years. He was the very first guy, I think, 3 years ago to say we need more troops to succeed. And so what has happened is, I think the public has realized that it is an important equation. There have been some polls done by the New York Post recently, had one that showed a majority of the people want success in Iraq. They don't know how to spell success. They don't know what it means to succeed, but they want it to succeed. And so these are indications that maybe it's not as bleak as some people think. Maybe it's not as bad politically for John if he actually is able to generate the public will to succeed and rely upon the Bush administration to actually get the job done.
But Rick, do you accept the premise that he is somehow in the public's mind, looking at polling data and just based on your political gut, do you accept the premise that the public or the Republican nominating electorate more closely associates him with this policy than the other two?
Oh, absolutely. I have a candidate who makes public statements like, I'd rather win a war than win the nomination. I mean, that kills me. I mean, my job is to win a nomination. I don't know anything about fighting wars. And so, sure, I mean, but I think it shouldn't be diminished. In other words, this is what part of this election is going to be all about. The idea that somehow people can go out and win the Republican nomination by talking about other issues and not addressing this head on and not making it the central theme of this debate is naive.
Alex, your candidate does not have broad foreign policy experience, and he is cleverly biding his time, saving his surge in the polls till later, while his candidate's foolishly rushing ahead too soon.
We've got them right where we want them.
I understand, and I'm not a cynical reporter. I think all three candidates take their positions on the surge based on looking at it and what they believe. But do you think it's possible that as the year unfolds, depending on what happens on the ground, that this could be an issue that will be a political bonanza for Governor Romney in competition with other Republican candidates, or is it best neutral for him?
I don't think that anything other than success in Iraq is a bonanza for any Republican candidate. I think
What about within the nomination contest, though?
I think we're all basically in the same boat, and that is that we all want change. The president wants change. We all want success in Iraq. That's what we want to see. We've got troops in the field. And I think anybody who talks about it in political terms other than you want America to succeed here is doing something incredibly wrong and would be seen as such. So no, I don't think there's some things you just don't want to look at that way.
What do you say inside your secret, private, not to be shared Romney strategy meetings about what's happening to Senator McCain on the Iraq issue?
We admire his political courage.
Almost as if we worked that out in advance. I want to move to a different issue. Iraq, a serious issue, a substantive issue, but one obviously playing a huge role in this race and will. Another which is on some level process and inside baseball, but I think political professionals believe will play a huge role in determining their nominees, which is the calendar, the nominating calendar. Iowa and New Hampshire seem to in line to play a very big role in this campaign. Let me ask you to just give a yes or no answer to set up here before we talk about the overall calendar, starting with Rick. Will the winners of Iowa and New Hampshire have a leg up, a significant leg up as they've had in the past this cycle, or do the changes in the calendar de-emphasize Iowa and New Hampshire, do you think?
No, I think the winners of Iowa and New Hampshire have a leg up.
As much as always.
Especially if it's one person named John McCain of Iowa and New Hampshire.
Alex? More of an influence.
Yeah.
Chris, your candidate has not spent as much time in Iowa as some of the others. Do you think that those two states are as important, will be as important in 2008 as they've been in the past?
I do, and it's simply because it is a process question, but this front-loading advance of states moving up to February 5th that follow that sequence of still it's yet to be set, even when New Hampshire and Iowa, and you leave out an important state such as South Carolina too. But all of these states used to be, particularly in South Carolina, used to be more in a defensive mode where there were firewalls that were set up. I think with this advancing, and I think strategically it looks as if these early states will be an accelerator that you could take advantage as well as too politically with those larger states, because you've got everywhere between, when the votes are cast in those Iowa caucuses, you probably have 18 to 17 states moving up their primaries, roughly 700 Republican delegates, just to that timetable between January to February the 5th.
Right. We don't know all the states, of course, that are going to be on February 5th, but there's some real big ones, including California, that are talking about moving to that day. In the past, candidates who've done well in Iowa and New Hampshire have done well in subsequent contests, largely off of the momentum. Is it possible, Chris, for a candidate who doesn't do well there to have conditioned the media and other people who play a role in the expectations game to say, look, we may have finished third in Iowa or third in South Carolina, but look at all the delegates that are available to us in California, New York, Illinois, wherever. We're going to do well on that day, and we're going to wake up on February 6th with the most delegates, and you should not drive us out of the race after Iowa and New Hampshire if we don't do well. Is that a plausible scenario for a campaign?
It could be, and still it's an assumption. We won't know till they vote, but there's still a question of where voters, could they still remain parked or waiting after these early contests. But all history points to the importance in the past, and probably will be more important because of the front loading.
Rick, your candidate skipped to the Iowa caucuses in 2000.
Skipped through New Hampshire.
Skips through New Hampshire. But he's competing, as best we can tell, in Iowa, spending time there, plans to make an investment there. What has the reaction been of the good people of Iowa to a candidate who spurned them 8 years ago, but is now coming back and asking for their vote?
Well, he's been drinking a lot of ethanol lately. That was the one remark that he made in his first town hall there. It doesn't taste very good, but it's very effective. It gets you up in the morning right away. Look, I think it's been okay. I mean, it's obviously a bit of a hurdle. No one's ever skipped Iowa, done well, and then come back and said, hey, I want to do well in Iowa. it's a caucus state, as you all know, and that poses its own organizational issues for the senator. But look, I mean, I think that he wants to lead the party. He wants to be the nominee of the party. That means he has to be the nominee of our party in every state, and it's more difficult as a non-insurgent to pick and choose. So I think that he's made a brave choice of going to Iowa, and we'll see what comes out.
Alex, none of the three candidates you represent, I suspect, will enter into the federal system where you get matching funds. If you don't take the matching funds, you can spend unlimited money in every state. The matching funds limit how much you can spend overall in an individual state. So one of the things people talk about in terms of front loading is the importance of raising money. Now, you work for a candidate who is the most personally wealthy of the three. Have there been any discussions in Romney's strategy meetings? I keep going back to your strategy meetings because they fascinate me. Of the governor opening up his checkbook and maybe putting personal millions into this race in order to be better positioned to compete on expensive television in those February 5th states?
It's a great country where a person can work hard and succeed and build a little nest egg.
Has that been discussed, though, of him spending his personal wealth?
No. Right now, we're, the campaign's being successful. I think Governor Romney has found an audience, and as a matter of fact, from in the top tier of the three candidates and having a lot of fundraising success, I think, as a lot of the Republican candidates are. So there's no need to consider that at this point.
Okay. I want to move to the question of the youth vote, but I want to ask one more fundraising question in sort of an unorthodox style. I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. Don't freak out. You're all going to close your eyes, and I'm going to ask you to point at the person whose campaign you think will raise the most money in the first quarter, and you can point at yourself. All right? So close your eyes. No peeking. Close your eyes, gentlemen. Close them.
I'm not going to play your stupid game.
Yeah.
Alex
I was
closed
afraid
first.
of that. Alex did close it.
Alex was already closed.
All right. We'll do it in a more conventional way. Whose campaign will raise the most money in the first quarter of these three?
Of these three, it should be John McCain. He's been out there the longest.
All right. Rick?
Well, I hope we do, but it's very, it's difficult to raise money in the environment we're in and with the competition that we have.
So you don't know?
Yeah.
Or
Well,
you're not saying?
If I knew, I would say so.
Chris, who's going to raise the most in the first quarter?
This will be my vote for John McCain.
John McCain.
Can we just call it a day, file the reports, and let's go?
Expectations high. Let me
Are
ask
we
you.
raising expectations? Is that the name of the game?
Let me ask you, Chris. Your candidate right now is, I think, without dispute, although he has had some bad press in the last few days, has had a lot of very good press, and the public opinion polls have certainly created the impression, which was pretty unanimous in a lot of circles before, that he couldn't be the Republican nominee, to people saying he could be, and in some polls he's above 50, 60% in terms of the nomination fight. So is that likely to help Mayor Giuliani raise money? Everyone in this panel has events almost every night between now and the end of the quarter, March 31st. So is that likely to help Mayor Giuliani raise more money in the next couple weeks?
It should, but it's not just about money. I think it's more a reflection about the attributes, what Republican primary caucus goers and voters are looking for right now. And they are looking at a set of attributes where he's very favorable on leadership, as well as his focus of competency. It's a trait that they're looking for. There's a doer image from the New York accomplishments that what Republican primary voters are looking for. So I think that's obviously certainly a premise that the Giuliani campaign is based on, but it looks as if the numbers are reflective as well, too. But on money, there's no question. Money support's a good indication of people support. But we're just now starting, so this is the first quarter of, the first FEC cycle. So
going up against this behemoth of
Yes.
the McCain people
Right,
who've been
exactly.
around. Alex, young people, we've talked about this earlier today, have a chance to be involved in this campaign increasingly through the web-based activities, which are something the campaigns are all paying close attention to. How much of a quantum leap will there be in, do you think, the youth vote in the Republican nominating process, in the general election in November 2008, and how much in terms of youth participation through all manners on the web?
It's something we've seen that's different this election than anything we've seen before. There's a wise old advertising fellow who said once that the amazing thing about most trends is they don't happen. The decline of television, of radio and TV came in, when something new comes in. So we still have the old established media out there, in which it was very important for some of us, and especially those in journalism who cover both new media and old, participate in both. But something that has changed now is that there are so many more vehicles and channels which to communicate with voters, and the internet and cable, and it's so fragmented out there. But it's not just more channels, it's the velocity of it. It is consuming information from campaigns at a pace we've never seen. And of course, maybe it's the youngest, most energetically, most technologically savvy generation that we've seen participate in politics. I mean, for them, the medium is the message. If the campaign uses new media, if the campaign participates in new media, that's message for them. That shows you understand the way the world is moving. So, yeah, it's something that's, they're still old media, they're still going to be, but this election, I think more than any other we've ever seen, you know, it's not really our campaign, it's your campaign. This campaign will be fought out in the earned media and on the internet and new world out there.
Chris Hennick, does Mayor Giuliani use the internet? If so, for what? And what will your campaign do to take advantage of his appeal to young people?
Well, let's answer first the campaign of young people.
And hope we forget the second.
Right. No, I think clearly, I think this campaign will largely, this 2008 campaign, a lot will be driven from outside the campaign, from what was within campaigns, particularly on social networking and where we're seeing the web take us. Certainly, from where political campaigns have gone in the past, this is a whole new venue. But I think from where I know, what tools we're going to use, we're going to be reaching out to more of the social side of networking, and you'll see a whole host of other tools. I can't say that he's that emailable in his own personal life, but I think he appreciates the political context of where this will take us and where we can reach voters, and particularly young voters as well too.
Rick, when something happens to one of the campaigns, frequently my colleagues and I will analyze it and say the campaign intended to do this, they intended to do that, as if all the things that happen inside the campaigns is actually well planned, when in fact I gather sometimes it's happenstance and chaos. So take us behind the decision to put one of the older candidates in the race, shall I say, Senator McCain, on the Letterman show and to announce his candidacy there. Was that as some said, an effort to appeal to young voters in a new media format and make a big splash there, or did he just blurt that out?
Well, you know, we wanted to put him on the internet, but he wouldn't do that. So, no, let me just say, though, if you are interested in John McCain on the internet, it's johnmccain.com, okay? And we do take contributions because we have to be ahead of these guys come the end of March. So please feel free. No, I think sometimes it's sort of overthinking that happens in the media when it comes to those kinds of things. I mean, if you think about John McCain and this sort of pseudo-announcement, how many of you really believe John McCain wasn't already running for president? So it's more declaring the obvious, and he's very much a declare the obvious kind of guy. And if he sits through a meeting where he says, "Oh, you know, when should we announce this campaign formally?" He's the kind of guy like, "How about tonight? I'm on the Letterman show." You know, the only trouble we got into, though, is that he promised Jay Leno he'd announce on his show, so now we got a little West Coast issue. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's out there sometime soon. But I think it's much to do about nothing. John McCain's the kind of guy, he's only been on Letterman 25 times in the last 5 years. I'm just happy it didn't happen on Comedy Central, because then nobody would have taken it seriously, and we would have had to do it all over again. So
nothing as highbrow as Letterman.
Yeah, I think look, John's a very practical guy, and he likes to have fun. And I think part of what sometimes is missing in presidential contests is the enjoyment of this great experiment we get to do every cycle. And this is fun, and it ought to be fun.
Can he, as the oldest candidate in the race, be the most successful candidate with young voters?
Can we just come to an agreement as to how many times you're going to say the oldest candidate in the race? I mean,
I'm sorry. Can he, as the most experienced candidate in the race,
I like that better.
Can he be the it candidate amongst young voters? Is there a barrier because?
Yeah. Look, I mean, it wasn't that long ago he was the it candidate amongst young voters, and he still holds the same attitudes that he had. So I assume it wasn't because he was the young man at 63 that he ran last time he ran. That was certainly not the it candidate thing. So I think it's your ideas, I think it's your energy, and he's got the best of both of those. So.
Alex, a lot of attention in the national press to the two leading Democratic candidates, Senator Clinton and Senator Obama. And I want to talk about the impact that that's having on your race. But At this point, would you hazard a guess of who the likely Democratic nominee is?
No, and I wish them as much contention as possible in figuring that out.
Do either of you have a strong opinion about who the Democrats are likely to nominate?
Is Howard Dean running again?
Do you have a strong opinion at all?
I think we're just earning the Republican nomination and getting started. Anybody who's trying to at least juxtapose general election expectations right now is a little too premature.
Okay.
But
Alex,
it's interesting.
go ahead.
It is interesting, though, that on the Democratic side, I think on both sides, you're seeing a hunger for something new, for something fresh and change, and I think, who would have thought Barack Obama half a year ago? And so I think there it is on the Republican side. We don't have that problem almost running against the establishment. But on the Democratic side, that's going to be a tough thing for them to resolve out there and unify that party afterwards.
What does it say about the country, the media, or whatever else you want to attribute it to, that it appears to me that the notion of the first potential female president is treated like a big, exciting story in the media. The notion of the first potential African-American president is treated like a big, exciting story. And the notion of the first Mormon American to be president is treated like we're going to turn the country over to a cultist. That's how it's treated. That's what I'm saying. That's my opinion. What accounts for the discrepancy?
Mitt Romney's a Mormon?
What
I
accounts
wish
for the
somebody had
discrepancy?
told me that.
What accounts for the lack of equal coverage on the notion of an historic, exciting first?
Well, I think there's very little known about the governor's faith. It is something new. We've had minority candidates and female candidates for public office. But I think at the end of the day, it's just the unfamiliar as folks get to learn about the governor and his family and his values, and they understand, you can be a Mormon and end up like Harry Reid. So it doesn't necessarily seem to compel your political views. I think it's just a question mark that folks are right to ask about.
Chris Hennick, do you think that being a Mormon is a problem for Governor Romney in the nominating process? And does Mayor Giuliani have a comparable problem, something you would consider analogous, that he's got to address?
No and no.
Is Mayor Giuliani a Mormon?
Rick, do you think it will be a problem?
No.
That settles that. Let me ask you about the attention those Democrats are getting. Is that a problem, Rick, for your candidates in any way, that the Democrats seem to be, and I think likely to continue to get a lot of attention?
No, this is a very long process. I mean, we are, 11 months away from a lot of the delegates being chosen in either primaries field. And I think that there'll be plenty of time for everybody to make their pitch and punch through whatever kind of noise in the political system. And the American public is uniquely deferential to all the views that these candidates have, and usually gives everybody at least one shot at convincing them that they're the guy that ought to be, they're the person that ought to be in the White House. So I think it's just time will tell.
Chris, this is the first post 9/11 election without an incumbent. What impact will that have on the selection of the Republican nominee, do you think, as I lob a softball your way?
It is an historic election. I think it's still very much unknown, but it does set the sense of security, safety, protecting the United States. It sets a larger frame, and I think what's really fascinating is a couple of us just finished going to CPAC in Washington, D.C., and there was a sense of Ronald Reagan was mentioned quite often, but what's largely missed about Ronald Reagan, which was what was said and all throughout his career until he was elected president in 1980, that he couldn't get elected for various reasons. He was too conservative. His first candidate to be divorced at that time, and he would create a war, what have you. Well, all voters put that aside, and they voted for a larger set of attributes. And despite having the sense of where they were internationally. So I think you're seeing a lot of similarities between the 2008 election, where you talk about an open seat. There's those set of attributes that are driving internationally as well as domestically, but have the strength of that.
Sorry, Alex, you've got Mayor Giuliani, whose national reputation was built in a national security situation. Senator McCain, a war hero who's got broad military and national security credentials. how does Governor Romney compete in a post 9/11 era on those kinds of issues against those kind of credentials?
Well, I think one of the things that we've learned on 9/11 and beyond is that America is no longer safe and secure behind these oceans, not just militarily, but that it's a completely new global frontier out there. We have economic challenges, we have security challenges, we have diplomatic challenges, and they're all tied together. We can't remain a military superpower unless we remain an economic superpower. We have economic challenges from China, Asia, developing countries that could be great markets but could also be, fierce competitors. And America has to remain a leader in the world, a force for peace and security, not just a military decision. You don't need to hire just a policeman. You need who's going to lead a stronger country into the future. And if this election is about that, I think Mitt Romney has a pretty good case to make that he's the fellow who can go to Washington and change things the way he's done in Massachusetts, the way he's done in business, the way he's done in every arena of his life. And so you can unleash the American people to build a stronger country.
Rick, you mentioned somewhat jokingly that Senator McCain regularly says, if I have to lose the election over Iraq, I will. Senator McCain, like Senator Clinton, is frequently criticized on cable TV, on talk radio, in the blogosphere for being both too accommodating to the Republican Party and too much out of line with the Republican Party. And of late, I think, at any given day, it's hard to tell from which direction more of the incoming is headed his way. Is that something the campaign thinks about? Is that something the campaign thinks is a problem? Or is John McCain going to rise or fall on what he believes and not try to accommodate one side or the other the rest of the way? Take it.
Yes. Yeah, that's a hard one to answer. He's going to rise above and stand on principle, as he always has, which is why he gets various sides attacking him from time to time, and let the chips fall where they may.
What do you say to those?
Based on putting the national interest ahead of his political interest.
What do you say to those critics who say when he ran for president in 2000, he was much more critical of certain aspects of Republican orthodoxy, and that this time he's doing whatever he can to not let anyone get to his right on issues of the day?
Well, I would say, I would challenge them to say, and which issue is that? Because I think in 2000, the media always thought that he was much more liberal than he really was, and now they believe he's much more conservative than he really is. In other words, there's an expectation that the media creates of who you are, and they try to define you as their expectation, not as who you really are. And I think for John McCain, he's been pretty much the same guy his entire political career. He's one of the very few people who you can look at a 24-year career in the Congress and say, his voting record is very consistent. On these issues that people like to criticize, sometimes it strikes against the orthodoxy of our party. Climate change is a very good example of that. John got very involved in the climate change issue during the campaign in 1999. At that time, not only in the public domain, but certainly in our own party, there was a very hot debate as to whether or not the science could prove there was climate change. Well, 7 years later, there's universal acceptance that not only is there climate change, but that there needs to be something to do. And John's been one of the people pushing our party to get to the point where we have ideas that can help solve the problem and meet the needs that people want. So at the time, that was like, wow, this is not a Republican issue. Why would John McCain go out and campaign on climate change? Today, the party is coming to where he is. So I do think the fact that he's a leader and he tries to bring the party to places that they otherwise haven't been in the past shows not only that he has the ability to be intellectually curious into the future and get himself involved in issues that in the past haven't been orthodoxy.
Okay, we turn to your questions now. There are 4 microphones, 2 down here, 2 up there. My recommendation, if you have a question for Rick Davis, don't ask him to close his eyes in answering it. He doesn't like that. But do ask a question. Don't give a speech. Identify yourself, please, in some way. And if you'd like to direct it to anyone in particular, please feel free to do that. If not, we'll figure out up here who gets to answer. Sir.
Hi, thanks. My name is Luke Messak. I'm a junior at the college. This question is for all 3. As you know, millions of African men, women, and children die each year from preventable and treatable diseases like AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. And public health experts today say that the only way to turn this around is to address the shortage of healthcare workers on the continent. I myself have seen children die painful deaths because they were unable to reach doctors before it was too late. And currently in sub-Saharan Africa, you have 3% of the world's healthcare workers forced to battle 25% of the global disease burden. So the World Health Organization says that we can turn this around with common sense measures to train, recruit, and retain healthcare workers, and that the U.S.'s fair share of this would be $8 billion over 5 years. So my question is, as president, would President Giuliani or President Romney or President McCain commit to this $8 billion over 5 years?
All right, excellent question. Not all these gentlemen are policy experts, but Chris Hennick, you get to start.
No, but very good question. I think any, at least from a Republican candidate, would put the compass due north to what this current White House, this current president has done on AIDS, and particularly international AIDS. And so I think that's a very serious issue, and it's one of which I think the legacy will be, for this White House, will be one that will be focused on for a long, long time. So I think both the policy that's existing now in the White House as well as what your proposals are very valid and very valid to raise among candidates.
Alex?
I'm a lowly media guy, so it's hard for me to make policy commitments for that. All I'll say is that the governor's priority here in Massachusetts was to make sure that everybody had access to health care, and it's something that you think outside the box a little bit and came up with a new way to do it to address the problem. So I think there are ways to address these problems that aren't just how much are we going to spend and write a check is not the only way to look at the problem. Let's look at how we can address these things in other ways as well.
Rick?
Yeah, look, I think that health care in general is going to be one of the hottest debated topics, not only in the Republican Party, but the Democratic Party. There's no question that the public is losing confidence that our system is going to keep pace with the times. I would say that it is interesting to note that we still have, and I think we're encouraged by this, that we still have one of the greatest healthcare systems in the world. And I think a lot of people like you want to just make it better. John McCain has consistently supported the child health care program, CHIP, that's going to come up for reauthorization. That's a very Senate answer, and I'm trying to get away from those things. But one of the things that you talk about is the infrastructure, the people who are actually administering the healthcare system in the United States, and that is getting difficult, not only because of the litigious society that we've become and the amount of insurance that doctors and providers of these services have to have. It knocks a lot of people out of the business, but also the ability to get this kind of training in the education system that we have. And so I would say I don't know where the number comes from. Sounds like a ton of money to me, but it is in an area that I think this country is going to have to address, not only in this area, but in the whole delivery system of our healthcare system, not just whether or not we have access and what the cost is of this insurance. So it's obviously going to be hotly debated. We're probably not the best guys to be answering a real hard substantive question like that, but I think you will find that yeah, I know, we would never do that. But I think you will find that the candidates this time are going to be really held to a very high standard when it comes to what their plans are going to be for improving the healthcare system and the delivery system of our people. So,
Okay. Ma'am?
My name is Rachel Esplin, and I'm a freshman at the college. I'd like to address my question to Alex on the Romney campaign. I myself am a Mormon, and I don't know if you're familiar with the whole Facebook venue, but it's a pretty big part of most college students' life. And they have groups set up for various political candidates, including your three candidates. And the members who join that group, based on that membership, they will display related groups. And I've noticed with all of the Romney groups, all of the related groups are always like the largest Mormon Facebook group on Facebook. And I think this demonstrates a valid point, that it seems like a lot of the enthusiasm I hear for Romney is coming from Mormons or from really conservative Christians or kind of the Republican right. And I'm wondering how the Romney campaign is planning to extend and broaden their base, especially because I've heard that like the Massachusetts base isn't as strong as it used to be. And anyway.
She's only heard, it's a rumor.
It's a rumor.
Thank you. Sir?
Well, I think we're in good shape in that Massachusetts primary. The challenges that face this country are so much bigger than any one religious persuasion. If at this point, I mean, if we can't see that today, this country is facing a new generation of challenges like it has never seen before. How are we going to appeal to every American? That's the question that before I think all of us here on this panel. How are we going to appeal to Republican primary voters? I think going to talk to them about the North Star of American culture, what makes America a good and great country, and that's the strength of the American family. And how do we make that stronger? How do we make America more competitive in a world where without that economic strength you have no security, you have no jobs for the future, you have no retirement security, you can't afford health care. How do we keep America competitive that way? And also part of it, how do you keep America's military strength? How do you maintain it when there's so much competition for the dollars that we need? How do you rebuild those relationships, international relationships that are going to make America stronger? So how are we going to appeal to anyone? We're going to appeal to every religious faith. We're going to appeal to every campus group. We're going to try to appeal to them, hey, you know, this is your future. How are we going to lead a stronger America into the future? And, you know, every group that supports all these candidates, whomever they are, everyone's going to have different beliefs and things they think important. Because they support a candidate does not necessarily mean that candidate supports everything they believe.
Up there.
My name is Kavori Kariuki. I'm a Mason Fellow here at the Kennedy School. My question is also for Alex. I know Governor Mitt Romney is a staunch Mormon follower. And I'm sure you are aware that most Christians consider the Mormon Church a cult. And the Mormon Church also does have a horrible racial history where they basically discriminated and relegated black folk in this country and across the world. My question to you is, as his campaign advisor, what advice are you going to give to him to navigate this horrible history, and do you think he stands a chance with the black vote in this country?
All right, let's put him down as undecided. Okay.
It sounded undecided to me. He was almost giving you advice.
Okay. You know, both, I think there have been a time in this country's history when both Democratic and Republican parties had a history of racial relations that we wouldn't necessarily be proud of today. But you know what? This is America and things change. And as I understand it, the Mormon faith has changed. And that is not who they are. So, you know, what would I advise Governor Romney on that issue and all others? To absolutely be himself and tell the truth. And you know, I know he's a man of strong religious convictions, and anybody who's running for public office who's going to, for the slightest second, change their religious convictions for political gain doesn't deserve to run. So I think the reason people elect presidents in this country is because you're going to do the job. And that's based on your strength of character, your values, the kind of person you are. And you know, all our values here are shaped not only by our religion, they're shaped by our belief in family and by, you know, the experiences we've all had. That's just part of that web. So, you know, my advice to Governor Romney is to be the kind of person he's been his entire life. And my advice to America would be to look at the kind of person he has been, the way he's conducted himself, the way he's dealt with others, and make your judgment on that.
Let me preemptively applaud the first three questioners for serious, excellent, and succinct questions for the most part, and urge everybody to keep that up, starting with this gentleman here.
Hi, my name is Caleb, and on that note, I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but I have two questions. So,
Caleb, are you in the college?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm a freshman at the college.
Okay.
And I wanted to ask Mr. Davis, certainly Senator McCain has campaigned a lot for President Bush in 2004 and has been a big proponent of the troop surge. But also recently some statements that he's made about Secretary Rumsfeld and about the Bush administration's position on global climate change it seems like may have been trying to distance himself, and I was just wondering if that was a deliberate effort to distance himself from the Bush administration. And then for Mr. Hennick, I had a question about Mayor Giuliani's position on abortion. do you think that his position is going to hurt him in getting the Republican nomination relative to the other two candidates represented here?
You sure you don't want anything for him?
He needs a rest. Chris, why don't you go first?
I don't think his position will hinder, because where I think what you've seen him focus on, certainly on social issues, and that's clearly an important one to our party. But I think where you've seen his position has been is, particularly with Cahart versus Gonzalez, the Supreme Court decision on the partial birth abortion ban that has already been, oral arguments have been delivered. There'll be a decision, I assume, sometime this year, but I think he's already come out. Certainly, I know in fact he has, that he's upholding that ban with restrictions. So I think that's very important to focus on, as well as how he views the issue. He knows that New York is different than the rest of the country, and where the focus is in various issues are decided upon. But in the end, I think he's always been a person who he's felt like the women's had a right to choose, and it was the law. So he stands where he believes. But I think in that aspect, I think that's just as more certain than trying to change and alter positions. I think he's very sure of his reasoning and rationale.
Rick, before you answer the student's question, let me ask you, do you think the press makes too big a deal of Mayor Giuliani's position on abortion as compared to how big a deal it will be in the nominating process?
You want me to answer that question?
Yes, sir.
No, I think, look, I mean, these guys are going to be held to a lot of scrutiny, no matter what the position is on whatever issue. Abortion has been an issue that's been hotly debated in our party for a long time. It's not going to go away anytime soon.
But does the press make too big a deal of the problem it will cause for Mayor Giuliani?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard for me to dictate, what kind of coverage press should be giving, emphasis on different issues. So much of it depends upon what the cycle is that we're going through, and what the debate is at the time, and what news items are also going on around the country and around the world at that time. So it's hard to say. I mean, that's pretty speculative. I think that at some point in time, every one of our candidates are going to be held to a very close scrutiny on some issue that they think is out of step with the Republican orthodoxy. We've talked about a few as it relates to John McCain already today. So,
and that can segue into your answer here.
And that can segue into my answer. And I would say one of the things that I enjoy about being involved with John McCain is that he's like everybody we know. He gets frustrated. He's been pretty frustrated with how the Bush administration has handled the war in Iraq. As I mentioned earlier, 3 years ago, he came back from a tour in Iraq and said virtually every military commander, regardless of rank, told him we needed more troops to do the job. He sat down with Don Rumsfeld and told him that. And Don Rumsfeld looked at him and said, John, every military officer I know has told me that they have enough troops to do the job. Well, sure they would if you just fired the head of the Army that said you needed more troops. And so no kidding. So I think that he has this, he's like you. He has a frustration. He sees what's happening. There is nothing more valuable to him than the blood and treasure that our country has spilled on the battlefront in Iraq, and it gets him very frustrated. And so from time to time, he lets that frustration go into the public domain. Look, I think it's great. I think it's about time that there is a level of accountability to this war that up to this point in time we haven't seen much of. I mean, very recently, the administration appointed the guy who's been in charge of the war for the last 3 years to be the Secretary of the Army. He got a promotion for screwing things up. Now, what do you think that made John McCain feel like when he'd been presiding over the hearings with these guys and saying, look, are we doing enough to make improvements? And every time it was, don't worry about it, things are going great. I mean, it's just a few loose, dead enders. The war's coming to an end soon. So, I mean, I think you can react to that the same way you probably do every night when you see the evening news and say, what's being done about this?
Hi, my name is Ben Bolger, and I'm a grad student at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. And my question is, since we're at the Kennedy School of Government, probably President Kennedy's best-known book is Profiles in Courage, which talks about the need to make sacrifices and stand for your principles. And I think that message is very appealing still today of the need for authenticity in politics. And since we're talking to three strategists that are helping people get elected to serve at a national office, can you talk a little bit about your working relationship with your candidates? How do you help them retain their convictions, but also comport them to the needs of a marketable audience to get elected. Can you talk about the give and take that goes between their principles and your advice?
So how do you fake authenticity, I guess is no, just kidding. Alex, you first.
Genuine fake authenticity.
Yeah.
Yes, well, we take a lot of instructions on that from the news media. At this level of the debate and of leadership, you don't have men rise to the top here, women contend for this kind of office that don't generally know who they are and why they're running. And the myth that as much as we actually would appreciate and flattered by the compliment and actually charge for it if we can get away with it, we're not out here to manufacture something to these candidates. We're here to. I was talking to somebody the other day. How do you become a good presidential speechwriter? And it's you learn to ask the right question and take good notes. These men all have a perspective. There's a reason they got here to where they are. So, the working relationship is what's your vision for the country? Where do you think this place is going? And it seems that one thing I have learned is that candidates attract people around them. You can tell a lot by the team they have around them. In Governor Romney's campaign, there are a bunch of people who have never done this before. They come from government, they come from policy, but they've never participated in a presidential campaign like this. And they're full of new ideas, and they're excited about new ways of doing things. And so there's a wonderful chaos and spontaneity to it all. So each campaign, in a way, takes on the personality of its candidate.
I don't want to preempt you all answering, but my guess is you agreed with a lot of that. Is there anything you want to add to that? Or just associate yourself with Brother Castellanos' remarks?
I would say that there is a dynamic in this that sometimes, you come to this fork in the road. And it's an important fork. There are days when you read polling data and it says, you need to go to the right fork to get the votes that you need to be President of the United States. And that's not where your candidate is headed. And we had a fork like that. We in the South Carolina campaign in 2000, all the local data says you got to be for keeping this Confederate flag on the top of the Capitol. And we kept telling John, look, you got to be for this. And he's like, well, I don't like it. And we convinced him, us advisors, that was the only way to win in South Carolina. And he resisted it constantly. And you would probably remember the great episode on a rival network one Sunday where he had botched the answer to this question so many times, we literally wrote it out on a card for him and said, just read this. And he did. In retaliation, he whipped out the card and said, my advisors told me to read this today. And they always have the ultimate revenge.
That's like faking authenticity.
That was definitely faking authenticity. And you know what? For a guy who was the straight talker, it really stuck in his craw. So after we got waxed in South Carolina and we were dead out of the presidential race, he insisted on going back to South Carolina and giving a speech saying, I lied to you. I told you I'd come and tell you the truth. I told you I would come and give you straight talk. And I lied to you about that flag. It is a flag that represents hatred and racism, and you ought to take it down, and you ought to put it somewhere else. And you know what? At the time, we weren't thinking, hey, well, we may have to run in South Carolina again. Otherwise, we probably would have tackled him again and tried to stop him from doing it. But you know what? At some time, you've got to just trust the instincts of the guy who's going to be sitting in the Oval Office making those judgment calls every single day without knuckleheads like us in the room. And that's the advantage, I think, that we have with John, is he completely listens to that inner voice.
Mayor Giuliani, from my vantage point, he's asking the questions, what does he offer the country? What does he offer his party? Why should he run? Will there be enough people that would support him? So I think all of those very vital threshold questions are asked by him and him alone. And it's up to us, for people like us, to implement that or execute that in certain various ways in the campaign. But I think first and foremost, it's what his general beliefs are and what his rationale for running is.
Ma'am.
Hi, I work at the Harvard School of Public Health. I wanted to ask you about your candidate's plans for addressing the shortage of nurses in this country. The Department of Labor estimates that by 2010, we're going to have a shortage of 1 million nurses in this country alone. And a study done at the University of Pennsylvania estimates that about 20,000 people a year die in this country because they're in hospitals with overworked nurses. So if we address this shortage, not only do we save American lives, we're also going to save lives in developing countries, because a large proportion of nurses and doctors trained in developing countries immigrate to this country and to the UK to fill up the slots that we don't manage to fill ourselves. So what are your candidates' plans, and do those plans include long-term solutions like strong science education, better salaries and working conditions, and also an ultimate move to universal single-payer health care, which for many reasons we should have, but in this particular context would cut down on the bureaucracy that is involved that currently takes 1/3 of the time of all the nurses and doctors to deal with, instead of saving lives.
Thank you for the question. Another excellent policy question. Let me just say, I think I'd recommend to the Kennedy School that there be a forum with advisors to the candidates on health care, because it's obviously going to be a big issue in both parties. And then substantive questions like that can be answered. Now, I say with great warmth and affection, we have 3 political hacks here. And I fear that if I ask them to, I mean, I know if we ask them to address this, they don't know the answer to what their candidate thinks about this or how it's going to fit into their eventual health care plan. So I'm going to give them all a chance to answer, and I'm not diminishing the question at all, but I'm a little concerned that it's a mismatch between what they know and what they could reasonably tell you about what they know compared to some other issues. So it is a good question. I hope you come back, if the Kennedy School takes my suggestion, has a healthcare forum, and you ask that, because it's obviously one of many important healthcare questions. Do any of you have a clue what your candidate thinks about how to get more nurses in America?
I think all 3 of us are pro-nurse.
Okay.
That's a great way to put it.
Again, it's a perfectly wonderful and important question, but
I would say it's probably safe to assume, too, we're all against a single-payer system.
Yes, that would be true.
But nonetheless.
Will you bring this back to your candidates? I mean, this is something that they
Absolutely.
need to be thinking about if they're not.
No, I can honestly tell you, we've had discussions about this and similar issues, and it's not that they're not thinking about it, it's just that we're not the most qualified people to answer your question. But I would say that things like the development of these kinds of programs in community colleges are becoming, I know that may be an anathema to this institution, but community colleges are becoming a great place in the United States to train workers, especially in areas that are being underserved. And their combination of joint ventures with corporations like hospitals to provide skilled nursing is one of the things that's a great success so far in our education system at the community college level. I would also say secondarily that the expansion of programs like H-1B visas to allow the importation of, I shouldn't say importation, the immigration of people with great skills. I know. See, it's a gotcha environment here. I corrected it, okay? It'll be in the newspaper tomorrow. But to allow a much more effective immigration policy, because we're strangling our country's development economically and in your case medically, because we've overreacted in many cases to the experiences we've had from 9/11. And we are hearing not only from hospital administrators, but from businesses all over the country that they need that trained labor to come in easily and in large numbers. And I think that's part of the strength of our country's economy in the past, is that we've been able to absorb people in these fields. So it's not that we haven't thought about it, it's just we're probably not that well schooled on this issue.
Dr. Hennick, Dr. Castellanos, either of you wish to weigh in on this? No, you don't. Up there, please.
Hi, my name is Jeff Kwong. I'm a student at the college, and I'm also a member of the Harvard Republican Club here on campus.
Do you have a candidate yet?
I'm sorry?
Do you have a candidate yet you're supporting?
We have, I'm the president of the club, so I can't personally announce that because we don't endorse in primaries. But a lot of what we do right now is, outreaching to attract minorities into the club. Especially racial minorities and members of the LGBT community, into supporting the Republican candidate in 2008. I was wondering what commitment your campaigns are making to support diversity in your campaigns and to make sure that minorities will be voting Republican in 2008.
Excellent question. Alex, you can start.
As a guy who came to this country 11 years old from Cuba many moons ago, I don't know what commitment the campaign is making to specific minorities. I hope none. I hope it's a commitment for opportunity for everybody. The things that attracted, my parents to this country, and I think for everyone. Look, if the Republican Party is going to be successful, it's got to be the party of opportunity for everybody. Not targeted tax cuts that are just for this group, or not some specific policy for this. There are 300 million people in this country and every one of them is needed right now to produce economically, to stand up politically for the right things. Every one of them is needed right now. It's not this group or that group. I think we've had enough of that kind of politics. And people, frankly, are a little tired of it. I think that's one of the differences, between Republicans, certainly Governor Romney, is I think we have an opportunity to do something a little bigger.
Rick Davis?
Well, it's hard not to disagree with that, except that I think there are certain things that we do as a party that closes off our opportunities to expand and make a bigger tent out of it. And I would address immigration as a classic example of that. We were talking earlier in a separate forum about our ability to attract Hispanic voters as a party in the future. George Bush, when he got reelected, got 42% of the 43% of the Hispanic vote. It was the high watermark of Republican recruitment at the ballot box for Hispanic voters. An admirable task, and one that I think Bush did a tremendous job in during his campaign. In 2006, after 2 years of a very divisive debate on immigration, where many in our party basically said, close off the borders and gas up the trucks because we're sending them all home, the Republicans on the ballot cumulatively got about 26% of the Hispanic vote. I would say right now, in places like my boss's home state of Arizona, that there are very few Hispanics who are now registering as Republicans. He has said repeatedly, I would like whoever takes my job, ideally in 2008, when he's elected and sworn in as president, I would like the next senator from Arizona to be a Hispanic. We don't do enough in our party to think through sometimes the kinds of issues that we tackle and the way we talk about them to determine whether we're going to have a dialogue with large portions of the American public. And I just think that from a perspective of trying to broaden our party's base and trying to make us competitive, I mean, I'm about winning elections. And you need people to do that. And people have certain attitudes toward things. And I think our party needs to be a little more sensitive to them.
Chris?
That's one of the strengths of the Giuliani candidacy now, is to broaden certainly the party and also throughout the nomination, but also in a general election. I think Asian, you actually are younger, and in your approach there's no difference in this sense, other than I think you have a greater sense of the future. You want to know what candidates are going to propose for the future, and I believe that at that standpoint, I think this candidacy, if we look in the future where we're going to go, not rely on the typical 39 to 40 states that have been waged in the general election and in the past. I think there'll be a whole host for the Republican Party to grow stronger with a whole sense of not only younger voters, but voters of Asian descent and Latino, all across the board. So it's very critical and very vital for the Republican Party to continue to grow and reach out.
Thank you. Up there, please.
Hi, I'm Jeff Ginsburg. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. With all due respect, Mr. Halperin, we have the three top advisors to candidates for the presidency of the United States, and it's a policy school. So I am going to ask a policy question. I wanted to ask, in terms of your candidates' policies around gay rights and homosexuality, do your candidates believe that homosexuality is genetic or environment or both? And I would ask that you answer that with one word: genetic, environment, or both, as the main factors for why they're homosexual. And two, do your candidates actually look at data like with any other policy piece and deciding their policies on homosexuality? And I would specifically ask Governor Romney's advisor, we now have a state that has gay marriage, and it's been here for a while, so now do you look at the data to see if it's had this extreme negative effect that your candidates thought that it might? Thank you.
Well, I give them a little more time to think about their answers. I'll just say I'm not at all opposed to policy questions. I welcome them. In some cases, I'm pretty confident. I know them well enough to know they probably don't know, and their candidates may not even have fleshed out positions.
Well, that concerns me, but I'll leave.
Well, this is an early starting campaign, but it is February, and if you look back, most candidates develop their policies over the course of the year. So The fact that they'd all, I don't think I've ever covered a presidential candidate who had a nursing policy in February the year before the Iowa caucuses. I may be wrong, but I don't think I've.
Sir, it's a governor, a senator, and a mayor of the largest city in the world. They don't have a policy on nursing. I'm very concerned.
Just to be clear, the candidates and their top policy advisors, I'm sure would have things to say about it. These aren't in every policy question the right guys to ask. But I don't want you to think we're not welcoming policy questions. And this is one that should be pretty interesting, and I think they should have answers. So I'll remind you, since I filibustered a bit, not on this one, genetic, environment, or both. And in the case of Governor Romney, have they looked at data to suggest whether Massachusetts has become a bad place in the wake of a worse place?
Do they look at data to form their policy on homosexuality?
Right. Okay. I'm pretty sure I know what everybody's answers are going to be. I'll write them down here like Jeopardy. Final Jeopardy. Chris Hennick, environment, heredity, or both?
I've been more focused on the index of political. I've been more focused on the index of political predispositions from that standpoint of all three choices. So I don't.
Do you know Mayor Giuliani's position?
I'm sure he has one, but I don't know that to answer.
Do you know your candidate's position?
I can honestly say I've never had that conversation with John.
Alex,
so
do you know your candidate's position?
I have not talked to Governor Romney about how his view of the science.
Okay. They just don't know is the answer to that. Now, have you looked at anything about what's happened in Massachusetts since gay marriage was legalized by a judicial decision, and whether it's had any impact on the state adversely or for the good?
For the state here?
Yes. Have you looked at that?
We've been so focused on ourselves and where we're going in organizing that we're not looking at any dynamic between that issue. I know the mayor's clear in his position in the past of where he stood, certainly on gay rights as mayor of New York City and where he's focused as well as his position. But no, we're not putting this in a context of Massachusetts.
To the extent that it continues to be an issue, would you recommend in formulating a public policy position for helping your candidate formulate a public policy position, that they look at the effect in an experiment, an uncontrolled experiment in Massachusetts, to decide whether gay marriage was a bad thing, or would that not be part of the calculation?
Unlike the calculation, I think what's as his whole DNA is respect for the law and being a former prosecutor, I think he gets a general sense is that these were decisions that were made by the courts instead of legislatures and states. So I think in that context he understands the environment and the implications of.
Rick?
No, we have not looked at any data as it relates to Massachusetts, and I don't know if it helps to define what our position is on it, if that's interesting to you, but I mean, we haven't seen any data on Massachusetts.
Alex, special burden of Massachusetts candidate.
I have not seen any data, but I'm not sure that what the question is, or if I could answer it. If Governor Romney believes kids do better with a mom and dad, some people may disagree with that, but he thinks that's what's best for society, to have more of that to raise kids. If better, what does that mean in terms of how the kids are raised? Time, is it economic? I mean, there's a lot of ways to define that. So, and I'm not sure what. We'll have to take a look at the data, but it's all I'm saying is it is not just a decision of adding zeros and ones.
See if we get some more in here, sir.
Hi, thanks for your comments tonight. My name is Simeon Kimmel. I work at Brigham Women's Hospital. Earlier, this question is for Rick. Earlier you said that you thought that $8 billion over 5 years seemed like an extraordinarily large amount of money for help for AIDS in Africa. I'd like to point out that that's about as much money as we're spending in 1 month in Iraq. And you also said that you thought that our health system here is functioning quite well when compared to other systems. And I'd like to point out also that half of the people in this country who have AIDS don't have access to treatment.
Both valid points. I need you to ask a question if you have.
So I was wondering if you could comment a little bit more on your thoughts about your candidate's positions on AIDS treatment.
Yeah, first of all, let me remind you, I think the question wasn't about AIDS in Africa.
It actually was, but you misheard it.
Okay, then I misunderstood it, and I apologize. Thank you.
I should have interrupted you, but...
I do have listening problems sometimes, and I get excited before I speak, I don't think. So I apologize. I thought we were talking about practitioners who are helping with the AIDS epidemic here in the United States and other things like malaria and others. In fact, I think probably $8 billion isn't enough, over a 5-year period to deal with that question. But I also know that coming from a recent meeting with Bono in John McCain's office the other day, that sometimes it's not money that's making the difference, and that we hear a lot about the Bush commitment for large amounts of money to go into Africa for AIDS, and obviously the very generous work being done by Bill Gates and his foundation and others in Africa. But in many cases, as I understand it from what they were telling us, is that it's the local community development people who are actually the recipient of some of those funds, but only small portions of them who are actually having the best impact in trying to not only treat the disease there in Africa, but also to keep it from occurring and reoccurring. And the most amazing thing that I learned in the course of that is that we don't have any close good count on what we really think the epidemic is, not only in Africa, but here in the United States. You could not find a state that can report to you exactly how many AIDS and HIV/AIDS victims they have in their state. We don't have a way of counting. And so in order to start treating the disease in a realistic way, we got to start counting in a better way. And I think that was one of the first things that John took from the meeting that was so interesting to him. So I apologize for getting it wrong the first time. I hope I'm a little closer to the right answer this time.
I'm glad you got to do that. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Hummel. I'm a second-year public policy student here at the Kennedy School. Again, a question for Senator McCain's advisor. This is a bit about policy and strategy, but as the two kind of are conflated, I'd like to jump ahead 6 months. And while we all hope that this surge strategy in Iraq works out, there's a strong likelihood that it may not. And I'm wondering, how are you going to reconcile Senator McCain's probably convictions and passions, which you have upheld as something that you think is a good quality, with what might be a very politically unpalatable recommendation about what to do next in Iraq? So if he has to get on Letterman again, what would you tell him to say if, more troops are what's needed, and he believes that, but that won't fly politically and domestically?
Yeah, no, I think John has been very straightforward in what he's said in the past about the war, both in hearings in the Armed Services Committee with the General Staff and on television talk shows. And what he has said is very clear. And he says we either commit the number of troops that we need to win the war, and if that doesn't work, or if we don't do it, then we ought to just get out. I mean, I can't imagine a more clear public statement on a policy toward Iraq. Being from the military, John understands, and probably better than most, that the most difficult military maneuver that you can employ is a retreat. And most of the debate on Iraq in our public forums today is about retreating. And if you're in the military, put yourself into their boots for a second and think, hey, we're going to get out in 6 months, but tonight we're going to go into Fallujah and do night maneuvers and try and find bad guys. Any volunteers? Because in 6 months we'll be out of here. Now, do you want to be the last guy shot in Iraq? I mean, it destroys the morale of the military on the ground. And so part of what I think John's frustration has been is it's not you can have it both ways. You can't be there and get out at the same time. You're either there fighting to win or you get out. And you don't really try to have it both ways. And I think he's been very clear about this. This is something that he's said for quite some time.
That's going to have to be the last question, and as always, we wish we got to more. I just want to say 3 more things before we conclude. First, in 2 weeks, as we said, we'll have advisors here in this same space for the 3 leading Democratic campaigns, and we hope those of you who came back, and we'll see if we can stump the band with them as well. Second, I know a lot of busy people come to Harvard all the time to speak. These are 3 extraordinarily busy guys, so we thank you 3 for coming and sharing your thoughts with us. And finally, Chris Hennick, double credit for coming with a new young child, and I want to just warn people that he needs to go make an airplane so he can get home. So don't think when he stiff arms you on his way out that he's being rude, but he does have to get to Logan Airport, which is not effortless. So the other 2, I'm sure, will be glad to linger and answer all your questions, but Chris needs to go. So thank you all for coming. We appreciate it. We'll see you in 2 weeks.